Okay, and we're going. All right. So we've been talking about started talking about just kind of the general idea of God and attributes of God. There's a couple of different ways we're going to go with that. And as we do that, we'll kind of jump back and forth a couple of times, maybe between some of the different attributes, because it was interesting that just as we're getting into this topic, the Bible Project people are putting together this series on the character of God. So I want to see where that, we're bringing different parts of that into this. And so we're going to start by talking about and reading the passage that we'll be talking about today, which they really do a big focus on this passage. And kind of, when you look at this passage, and I'll talk about it in the video, but this is kind of like a self-disclosure. God talking to Moses is basically saying, this is my nature. This is who I am. So let me go ahead and get a couple of things going here. And we will jump ahead to read the we'll jump ahead to read the passage first, and then we're going to watch the video on this from the Bible Project guys. So let's go ahead and read. This is Moses, or this is God. Well, Moses being called by God back to the mountain, and then God kind of revealing himself, because just before this, Moses, it says, God, if you really, really care about me and you value me, I want to see your glory. And this is God kind of saying, okay, this is who I am. And it's something that's repeated throughout and referred to throughout the Bible. So therefore, it's a pretty significant thing. So let's go ahead and read here. Somebody want to read the first slide?
Then the Lord told Moses,
Chisel
out 2 stone tables like the first ones. I will write on them the same words that were on the tables you smashed. Be ready in the morning. The climb up Mount Shiloh and present yourself to me on the top of the mountain. No one else may come with you, and that no one is to appear anywhere on the mountain. Do not even let the flocks or herds graze near the mountain.
So what God's saying to Moses, now this is just after the Israelites, if you kind of remember, I've heard the story of the golden calf. They begin worshiping this golden calf that Aaron made for them while Moses was on the mountain the first time. Moses comes down with the 2 tablets of stone that God's chiseled the law on for him. And he gets so angry, he throws them to the ground and they get smashed. And so God's like, okay, come back up with 2 new tablets. I'm going to give you the law again. And let's see. And so while you're here, I want you to bring this up, and I will show you my glory. So, let's go on. Want to do this one?
So Moses chiseled out 2 tablets of stone like the first ones. Early in the morning he climbed Mount Sinai as the Lord had commanded him, and he carried the 2 stone tablets in his hands. Then the Lord came down in a cloud and stood there with him, and he called out his own name, Yahweh. The Lord passed in front of Moses, calling out.
Oh, sorry. I'll take this. Yahweh the Lord, the God of compassion and mercy. I am slow to anger and filled with unfailing love and faithfulness. I lavish unfailing love to 1,000 generations. I forgive iniquity, rebellion, and sin, but I do not excuse the guilty. I lay the sins of the parents upon their children and grandchildren. The entire family is affected, even children in the 3rd and 4th generations.
Moses admittedly threw himself to the ground and worshiped, and he said, O Lord, if it is true that I have found favor with you, then please travel with us. Yes, this is a stubborn and rebellious people, but please forgive our
Iniquity.
iniquity and our sins. Claim us as your own special
Possession.
The Lord replied, listen, I am making a covenant with you, and the
Presence. Yeah.
of all your people. I will perform miracles that have never been performed anywhere in all the world or in any nation. And all the people around will see the power of the Lord, the awesome power I will display for you.
Okay, so we see this conversation happening between God and Moses. Then let's go ahead and we will watch this video about this. So give me a second here and I'll get it going. All right.
The Bible is a collection of many ancient Israelite scrolls, and together they're telling one unified story.
Now, if you look at the second scroll, Exodus, you'll find 2 important sentences. They're actually so important that they're referenced and re-quoted over 20 more times within the Bible itself.
It must be important. What does it say?
Yahweh, Yahweh, that's God's name, a God compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, overflowing with loyal love and faithfulness.
I can see why it's repeated so often. These attributes of God are really lovely.
And the statement goes on. He maintains loyal love for thousands, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin. Yet he won't declare innocent the guilty. he will bring the iniquities of the fathers upon the children and grandchildren to the third and the fourth.
Okay, hold on. This last part takes a bit of a turn. We're first talking about God's love, and suddenly it's about his judgment on grandkids? So, is God merciful or vengeful?
Yeah, great question. Let's see these words in a larger context by looking at something important in Genesis, the first scroll of the Bible. There, God chooses one family, the Israelites, from among the nations, and he promises that he's going to rescue the whole world through this family somehow.
And Genesis ends with the family of Abraham in Egypt.
Then the book of Exodus begins, and this book has two large movements.
Right, okay, so this first movement of Exodus, God rescues Israel from slavery in Egypt.
And in the second movement, God leads them to Mount Sinai, where they camp out for a year. And God invites this whole nation into a partnership called a covenant, so that they can be shaped by his values and character.
And represent God to all the other nations.
Exactly. Now, this whole Mount Sinai movement in Exodus can be broken up into 4 literary units. First, there's the actual ceremony where the Israelites agree to be God's partners. And God sets up the terms of the relationship, starting with the 10 commandments. The first 2 are:
don't give your allegiance to other gods, and don't make any idol images of God. Seems simple enough.
After that, God shows Moses detailed blueprints for building this sacred home so that God can come and live among them.
Oh, right, and then comes a really long narrative about the building of that sacred home.
But you missed something. Right in between these sections is the story that has our description about God's character. The story begins with Moses going up on the mountain, writing down the partner agreement, as the Israelites are at the base of the mountain, violating the first 2 commands.
That's ridiculous. They're breaking the covenant vows while the ceremony is still going on.
Yes. And so God is hurt and angry, and he warns Moses that this betrayal will keep on happening. God is ready to call it quits.
But what about his promise to rescue the world through them?
Yeah, exactly. This is what Moses brings up. And so, what is God going to do? Should he end the partnership, which would be fair?
Or will he be faithful to his promise to Abraham and show them mercy?
Yeah, exactly. Now, look back at the words that we began with, and you'll see they're about this very tension between God's mercy and his justice.
Okay, so the statement opens like this: a God compassionate and gracious.
In Hebrew, this line has 3 words that rhyme: El Rahum V'Chanun. And the line overflowing with loyal love and faithfulness matches the first, as it also has 3 Hebrew words: Rav Chesed V'Emet.
Each of those lines have 2 attributes of God, and they surround a 5th attribute, that God is slow to anger.
Right. Now, that's the first half of this description of God. Then comes the second half. God maintains loyal love for thousands. And how is he going to remain loyal to people who keep rebelling against him? By forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin.
But God's forgiveness doesn't mean people can just do whatever they want.
Right. God's mercy is balanced in what follows. Yet he won't declare innocent the guilty. He'll bring the iniquities of the fathers upon the children and grandchildren to the third and the fourth.
The third and the fourth what?
Well, it's referring to generations of people who repeat their ancestors' rebellion against God. They'll get what they deserve. But notice, this small number of generations contrasts that massive number up above.
God's loyal love to thousands.
Right. And then check this out. God's forgiveness of iniquity in this line is contrasted with his justice on iniquity in this line.
Okay, and all those lines are surrounding a central line here about God's justice. He will not declare innocent the guilty. So while God is slow to anger, he is also just.
Right. This is the tension that these 2 sentences are exploring. How does a faithful and loyal God deal with such a rebellious people? This is the challenge God faces in this story, and it's the same challenge he faces in the whole biblical story as he works to rescue the world through this family.
With that in mind, we can take a closer look at these 5 attributes that God declares about himself to Moses. A God compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, overflowing with loyal love and faithfulness.
And we'll see how each one leads us deeper into the character of God and into the story of the Bible.
And so you get this picture of what God is talking about. And kind of like, they say in the Bible Project video, it is kind of a contrast or kind of a balancing act that's going on between the compassionate nature of God with his justice, that he wants to see justice. But the emphasis here is on the compassionate nature of God. We see how he we see God's compassionate nature kind of coming out in all of this quite a bit. And like I said, it's a self-disclosure. And it's interesting. I was reading this. I found this journal or kind of a piece of a devotional book or something like that, or group of theology papers, whatever, where this one guy was looking at it, this exact same verse, and he's kind of looking. He goes, a lot of times when theologians talk about God, they don't really talk about this a lot. It's like, here's God saying, if you want to get to know somebody, it seems like what God says about himself would be the place to start. And if I want to get to know Ricky, I'm like, okay, I want to find out, Ricky, tell me about Ricky, type of a thing. I don't want to know what so-and-so said about Ricky or so-and-so said about Ricky. I want to know Ricky. And I think when we want to know God, it's like, let's get to know what God says about himself. And it starts out with this whole balance of his nature and the emphasis on his compassion. The problem is, a lot of times I think in American Christianity, we tend to focus on the justice side. That God's going to get you if you do something wrong type thing. God doesn't ignore that. God's saying, what God's basically saying in this is, my nature is to forgive. My nature is to show compassion on thousands of generations. But I recognize that if I'm a just God, I can't let everything just go. I have to step in. Now, some people get kind of caught up in that whole, the sins of the fathers being visited on the children and the grandchildren. But I think what they bring out in the video, and kind of how I look at it, is there's sometimes just patterns of rebellion that exist in countries, in families, and things like that. And it's not necessarily that God's like, well, your grandfather did this, I'm going to do you. It's more that this repeated pattern keeps happening in a family, and God's like, well, if you continue to go this way, you continue to treat other people this way, you're going to suffer the consequences of how you're treating other people. Well, the first two were the ones that Moses smashed, but then he made two other ones. They were put in the Ark of the Covenant. We don't know. It disappeared. There's been people that have tried to trace it down. I mean, obviously, Raiders. Like in Raiders of the Lost Ark description. Yeah, there was kind of that. And this may have been, this was part of it. And probably where they drew the imagery of the guy, melting up, right as, well, I think it wasn't one guy touched it, one guy looked at it and, melted. And there was a restriction in reverence of the presence of God demonstrated in the Ark of the Covenant at that time that if you touched it, you would die. And there was a story of an individual who touched it in the Old Testament, and that person died.
But they disappeared.
No, they didn't just disappear. They just died. They landed, I don't know that it necessarily makes you disappear, but when you're overwhelmed with the presence of God in such a way that you get that close to it, it can, if your heart's not in the right place, and that's kind of the implication of this, then
You're telling me it's penalty.
possibly, we don't know now.
Well, we don't know that God's presence still dwells.
Yeah, God's presence may not even dwell in it. Basically, now the Bible says that God's presence dwells in us. That as we gather together, His presence is here with us. His presence through the Holy Spirit is with us. So the Ark of the Covenant, that's maybe what the whole Raiders of the Lost Ark thing's maybe a little off base is, even in World War II, at that time, we don't know, there was nothing that the Ark was about God's presence anymore. It was about God's presence in ancient Israel.
And His Spirit is in that.
Or in that Ark, or that box? No. Well, His Spirit was not even confined to that box before. The box just symbolized God's presence to the people of Israel.
Well, He did fill it.
Well, He did fill it with His presence, yes.
But they put it somewhere.
Yeah,
Or
I-
got destroyed.
it got destroyed. We don't know. It was after Babylon invaded Israel and desecrated the temple.
Say nothing like where that is.
Nothing. It doesn't say at all. We don't know what happened to it in all of that.
You could end up Israel.
They wouldn't know. They would not
You
know.
wouldn't even have a map.
They would not have a map. No. So
Well, if it got destroyed, their temple got destroyed and a lot of their holy things got carried off to other nations.
multiple times.
So, yeah, they probably have no idea where it is.
And I think we have to remember in that time period, and we're getting way ahead of this story.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I'm just wanting to put things. It's like the Mother Mary's tomb, right? Mother Mary's tomb is almost 1,000 times.
Well, we don't even know where that.
You know,
Yeah, we don't even know where that is.
but it's like where did person go?
We don't even know. I don't think they even talk about that in archaeology. I don't know. If
Certain movie it did.
there may have been a reference to it in a movie, but that doesn't mean it's in archaeology. I don't know. That would be an entirely different story. But I think, okay, back to what God was getting to here is that God's heart and His desire is to show mercy, to be slow to anger. So He has a lot of compassion. And I think as we get to know the nature of God, we need to get to know the compassionate side of God, because the compassionate side of God helps us have compassion on other people.
Question, another question. Why did God make things, certain things here like He did with here? Like body or Jesus' body or Mother Mary's body? Why did it all disappear? Like people don't believe, wouldn't that help them believe?
Well, Jesus' body is not there because He resurrected from the dead. He ascended to heaven. So actually, our faith is increased by the lack of a body. In Jesus' case, I don't know what I'd have to look up and see if there's any. Bodies decompose,
Yeah.
and bodies you know, when they put us in the ground, our body doesn't stay like it was. It begins to decompose.
It's like the community. Why he betrayed that? Like, why couldn't he hurt?
Well, he passed it on through oral tradition and then writing it on, having people write it down on papyrus, on scrolls.
Yeah.
So, in that sense, it didn't need to be there. That's why it was in the ark, and nobody ever saw it again at that point. The stone tablets of the covenant were there. Aaron's rod was there. These things were put in the ark. So that's why we don't see them.
Would we like the trucks that died?
Probably wouldn't be. No. Yeah, because the Romans would have torn it down.
Well, and the wood would have decomposed.
Yeah, the wood would have decomposed. It's just wood.
It probably turned into many other generations of trees.
Yeah, it's probably, yeah. I mean, wood is wood, and it doesn't become somehow just magical and no longer decomposed just because it was the wood that Jesus was crucified on.
Make a time machine like that.
Well, even if we can't do that, we can still, through what's been revealed to us and what the Spirit speaks to us, we can still hear and understand the nature of God. And that's what I think we have to keep remembering.
You ever hear like some type of things like that guy?
We've had that. I've had dreams, and I've had maybe, I'm in some way hearing a voice, yes. So,
Does he tell you God?
I usually can discern the voice, whether it's from God or not. Partly because that doesn't match the character of what I already know of God. Because if it doesn't match the character of what I know of God, then I'm thinking, no, that's probably not. That's probably somebody else trying to create fear in my heart. So that's where I look at it. I mean, that's how I look at it. Back to this whole thing about showing compassion for other people. I think that is critical because in America today, we tend to have this emphasis on, at least within religious circles, we have to convince people that are sinners and they're bad people before we can let them know that God loves them. And a lot of people know the world's messed up. And let's be honest, the world is messed up, and we know it. And we probably all have realized the parts we play in it. But what God wants us to know, and what God wanted Israel to know in that moment, was that he was a God that was going to be slow to anger, that he was compassionate, he would forgive them of their sins. And as we dig deeper into the whole character of God and the attributes of God, we're going to kind of keep digging deeper into all this. Well, I don't know, maybe move back and forth because I don't know how quickly they'll come out with the videos on these 5 character qualities. But we'll kind of move back and forth between some of the eternal nature of God type questions and also these character qualities and these attributes and some other ones we can go into as well. But I think what we want to do out of all this is really get to know God for who he is and for who he reveals himself to be, and not what others have told us about him for whatever reason. And even I would say sometimes even what the movies give us images of, because I think sometimes we speculate about too much in movies. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in movies too. But so any other questions, any other thoughts, any other thing that stands out in this? I was thinking about also, I was just looking at the sentence right here. I just remember where it said, if it is true that I have found favor with you, then please travel with us. Because this is a stubborn and rebellious people. But please forgive their iniquity, our iniquity and our sin. You know, that there was a point where God said, you know, I'm not sure I can keep traveling with these people.
There's people that don't like the way I see the first time slavery, was they starting like that time when it was as today?
Oh yeah, they were stubborn. They were very stubborn. People are stubborn, often stubborn. And so God had said, you know, particularly after the golden calf, at first he had said, I don't think I can travel with these people because my holiness was dangerous for them. But Moses is like, I don't want to go anywhere without you. I need you to be with me if I'm going to continue to meet these people. And at first God's like, oh, I'll send an angel. God was like, no. We need you because you are the one who makes us different. And I think God was kind of testing Moses in that point. I think he was a little bit honest with them about what they were dealing with. And I think we need to always be like, you know, God, yeah, we can be stubborn, we can be rebellious. Please forgive us and stay with us, type of a thing. So that's an important thing to remember.
In those days, they didn't grow. They draw.
I don't think they really did draw Moses. I don't think there are a lot of old drawings. Most art we see today is somebody's interpretation of it later. I don't think anybody ever, portraits just weren't big back then. And in fact, I think a lot of times the ancient Israelites would see creating a picture of somebody as almost creating an idol. That's why actually you don't see any early art of Jesus even. Not for yeah, nobody drew when he was around, which is people started to create art of him like a couple centuries later. After he died and resurrected and rose. So yeah, they just didn't do art of people.
Must wait.
That's the way some European artists created it, you know, a thousand years ago maybe, or a few hundred years ago. I don't know if, I think most people say that Michelangelo was the first one who really painted Jesus white. I can't remember if there was anybody else who did it before that. Because a lot of, even after they started to create art, a lot of the early images were much darker skin, more Mediterranean. So, yeah. Well, we're gonna transition into worship here. I'm gonna stop